Hello, everybody. We are back. we are. We were experiencing some technical difficulties in the first attempt of the stream. That's fine. I fixed the internet. I just had to. I called up my friend, the fascist from India, and he told me to unplug the router and put it back in. Lo and behold, here we are. Things are great again. So we're going to
Did you
dive right
try
into.
to unplug and put it back in?
We did. Yes,
You
we
reboot?
did. So we're going to be reading we're going to be going over La Raza Cósmica today by Jose Vasconcelos. Yeah, in this book, it's going to upset a lot of people. Indigenistas get very mad over this book. Wignats get very mad over this. Mexican liberals fucking hate Jose Vasconcelos. Like, he is a boogeyman to those people, and for good reason. He was willing to say things how he saw it. And even though I don't agree with everything Vasconcelos had to say, he was not just some irrelevant weirdo, if that makes sense, in Mexico. He was a serious presidential candidate. He was a serious government official, served in the military. He had to go into exile because of Porfirio Diaz. This was somebody that mattered quite a bit, to the point where if you actually take like Latin American history courses in university, I can attest for this personally. A lot of professors might make you read excerpts from this essay, which is 40 pages of La Raza Cósmica. I know I had to do that myself whenever I took the only Hispanic American class, basically, in college when I was a history major. And yeah, so we're going to dive right into here. There's a lot of very good quotes, but I'm going to read the first few paragraphs here that I think are really going to help dive right into this. So it says, the race that we have agreed to call Atlantean prospered and declined in America. After its extraordinary flourishment, after having completed its cycle and fulfilled its particular mission, it entered the silence and went into decline until being reduced to the lesser Aztec and Inca empires, totally unworthy of the ancient and superior culture. So I want everybody listening to understand here, and you guys can add to this if you guys want. Basically, what Vasconcelos is referring to here is the fact that there were actually more advanced Indians that existed prior to the Aztecs and to the Incas and to the Mayans. The Mayans specifically were actually in decline when the Spaniards met up with them. And while the Aztecs were not in decline, they were actually a relatively young empire, along with the Incas as well, if I'm not mistaken. They still were not, I guess, quite the same in achievements as many of these earlier Indian tribes that had existed. We're talking several centuries prior. So that's what he's referring to. So continuing on, it says, with the decline of the Atlanteans, the intense civilization was transported to the other sites and changed races. It dazzled in Egypt. It expanded in India and Greece, grafted onto new races. The Indians mixed with the Dravidians to produce the Hindustani, and at the same time, by means of other mixtures, created Hellenic culture. Greece laid the foundations of Western or European civilization. The white civilization, upon expanding, reached the forgotten shores of the American continent in order to consummate the task of re-civilization and repopulation. Thus, we have the four stages and the four racial trunks: the black, the Indian, the Mongol, and the white. The latter, after organizing itself in Europe, has become the invader of the world and has considered itself destined to rule, as did each of the previous races during their time of power. It is clear that domination by the whites will also be temporary, but their mission is to serve as a bridge. The white race has brought the world to a state in which all human types and cultures will be able to fuse with one another. The civilization developed and organized in our times by the whites has set the moral and material basis for the union of all men into a fifth universal race, the fruit of all the previous ones and the amelioration of everything past. White culture is migratory, yet it was not Europe as a whole that was in charge of initiating the reintegration of the red world into the modality of the pre-universal culture, which has been represented for many centuries by the white man. The transcendental mission fell upon the two most daring branches of the European family, the strongest and most different human types, the Spanish and the English. From the start, from the time of the discovery and the conquest, it was the Castilians and the British or the Latins and the Anglo-Saxons if we include the Portuguese on one side and the Dutch on the other. The ones who accompanied the task of beginning a new period of history by conquering and populating the new hemisphere. Although they may have thought of themselves as colonizers, as carriers of culture, reality, they were establishing the basis for a period of general and definitive transformation. The so-called Latins, well endowed with the richest, while the English had to be satisfied with what was left to them by a more capable people. Neither Spain nor Portugal allowed the Anglo-Saxons to come near their domains, and I do not mean for reasons of war, but not even to take part in commerce. Land predominance was unquestionable at the beginning. No one would have suspected at the time of the papal arbitration which divided the New World between Spain and Portugal, that a few centuries later, the New World would no longer be Spanish nor Portuguese, but English. No one would have imagined that the humble colonists of the Hudson and the Delaware, so peaceful and diligent, would go on taking over, step by step, the best and largest expansions of land until they formed a republic which today constitutes one of the largest empires in history. Our age became and continues to be a conflict of Latinism against Anglo-Saxonism, a conflict of institutions, aims, and ideals. So, fellas, anything you guys want to comment on these, paragraphs that I just read at the very beginning here? Because I think that is a good sort of stepping stone. And if you watch a lot of Momento Hispano videos, this is going to sound like very familiar stuff, even though this was written almost 100 years ago.
Yeah, it's basically what he what Vasconcelos saw, that the Anglo, like he basically lived in the 20th century, if I believe, if I remember correctly. Yeah, he was already living the danger and the threat of the Anglo-Saxon power, which is at the time it was the American regime, the United States. But he saw that right after the decline, soon after the decline of the Spanish Empire, like the one that took over was the British, and that's also, and there's actually certain historical clues where the British Empire was it was stagnant in terms of the imperial competition, but there were historical circumstances that helped the British to basically get them to where we are, to where they are right now. And we could go over that in more detail in some other time. But basically, the British Empire was eventually planning to subvert or weaken or balkanize the Hispanic monarchy, and they needed certain things to happen, the Spanish Empire, before they could take over. And Vasconcelos saw this, and he was seeing it in his very eyes. And at the same time, he foresaw that this power was temporary. Like they are powerful, yeah, the Anglo-Saxons, but due to the nature of their the way they make the rule over other nations, it was a temporary power that was destined to decline eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of really good quotes here that I want to just read as well. That again, this was written a long time ago, but it's like it still echoes as very powerful to this day here. So here's what I'm talking about. Here it is. So not only were we defeated in combat, ideologically, the Anglos continue to conquer us. And then basically he talks about how the fathers of Mexican nationalism, new Mexican nationalism, it says the founders of our new nationalism were, without knowing it, the best allies of the Anglo-Saxons, our rivals in the possession of the continent. And then it says here, we keep ourselves jealously independent from each other, yet one way or another we submit to or ally ourselves with the Anglo-Saxon Union. Not even the national unity of the 5 Central American states has been possible, because a stranger has not granted us his approval, and because we lack the true patriotism to sacrifice the present for the future. A lack of creative thinking and an excess of critical zeal, which we have certainly borrowed from other cultures, takes us to fruitless discussions in which our common aspirations are denied as often as they are ascertained. And then he also goes on to say, we shall not be great as long as the Spaniard from America does not feel as much a Spaniard as the sons of Spain. So I was just wondering, based Oppenheimer, what do you think of that quote there, where he says that?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat a little bit? I was
Yes.
basically reviewing some
No
notes
problem.
here.
So it says so this is Vasconcelos in another passage I picked out. It says, "We shall not be great as long as the Spaniard from America does not feel as much a Spaniard as the sons of Spain." So I mean, you're basically Puerto Rican, straight from Puerto Rico, that looks 100% like a Spaniard. What do you think about that?
Wow, that's interesting. But I think what he's saying is that is very interesting because we're technically we could technically conceive ourselves as quote unquote sons of Spain, but for Vasconcelos, we're more like a, how do I say this? I guess we could say we're basically the inheritors of their legacy, of the imperial, the cultural. We're not just sons of Spain's, like biologically, like we're the inheritors of that legacy, and that's very important to understand for people who think that the like they need people need to understand, like especially the gringos who they come and see the state that we are in now, like, oh well, if Spain is so great, well look at us. Well, um Vasconcelos is talking about a completely different time before the banana republics that we have devolved into, like in terms of the, at least culturally, and in some aspects socially, like we are not, we're both the sons, we're the inheritors, we're even we could even say we're brothers, like we're and so and another important thing that Vasconcelos can say, that has been said there, is that you can't also think that, and a lot of people, even in United States, even in here, they like to think that the Spain right now, this is important, the Spain right now is the same one as the imperial father that fathered the empire, and I think
That's been called for centuries. It does not exist. It has literally not existed for several centuries.
What
Let's make that
Vasconcelos
very
is
clear.
saying, what Vasconcelos is saying here is that what we have now is what we have right now is inheritors. Like even the Republic of Spain today is a son of the bigger Spain. So we can't think of ourselves as, oh, we're like, although there are people today that for different reasons, but for the most part, the Spain right now is just as an inheritor of the empire as all of us. So we're all the offspring of this empire. Like the Spain that you see right now today has absolutely nothing to do. Like, well, they have, but they're not like the imperial father. Like they're just another consequence of the banana republic process that happened during the early 19th century. So that's important to understand why Vasconcelos will be saying that. Like, why will he frame it like this? It's very important for people to understand.
Shit. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. So basically, I'm going to read this passage, and it's going to actually, Vasconcelos is going to be criticizing the French whenever they had a very large, I guess, control over the Spanish Empire, if this makes sense. So let me read this here. It says, the first stage of the profound conflict was decided in Europe, and we lost. Afterwards, when all the advantages were on our side in the New World, since Spain had conquered America, the Napoleonic stupidity gave Louisiana away to the Englishmen from this side of the ocean, to the Yankees. This decided the fate of the New World in favor of the Anglo-Saxons. The genius of war could see no further than the miserable boundary disputes between puny European states, and did not realize that the cause of Latinism, which he claimed to represent, was defeated on the same day that the empire was proclaimed, by the sole fact that the same day that the empire was proclaimed, by the sole fact that the common destiny was placed in the hands of an incompetent. On the other hand, European prejudice hid the fact that in America, the conflict that Napoleon could not comprehend in its full transcendence had already acquired universal dimensions. Napoleon, in his foolishness, was not able to surmise the destiny of the European races was going to be decided in the New World. When in the most thoughtless manner, he destroyed French power in America, he also weakened the Spaniards. He betrayed us and placed us at the mercy of the common enemy. Without Napoleon, the United States would not exist as a world empire, and Louisiana, still French, would have to be part of the Latin American Confederation. So, what do you guys think about that quote there?
It perfectly exemplifies the long-term mistake that the Spanish Empire did when they prolonged what was called at the time the Bourbon Pacts. So if anybody doesn't know what the
very
Bourbon
few people who are listening are really going to get this, so please explain it to them like they're 5-year-olds. Like, this is just the state that we're in.
So the Bourbon Pact, there were familial pacts between royal families is nothing new at all. Like all monarchies, whether they were in competition or they had to collaborate against a common enemy. All monarchies did what they call a royal pact with other families, and it's political in nature. It's mostly political in nature. And what they do with this pact is that two crowns, they get together, they sign certain treaties, and they basically make a certain legal bindings between each other to, like, whenever there's a threat to their territory or there's another threat against the empire, well, these two crowns are able to collaborate and act it out. And so Spain, they did the similar thing with the French crown, and they did it through the Bourbon families. And so historically, there were three key pacts that they did over time. Every time there was a new crown, and because of these pacts, some Spaniards they will sit on the French throne, and some French, like, they would exchange thrones because they were basically, like, you could say they were like one empire, but not exactly. But so to Spain, the first pact that they did was necessary because of the British threat, because Britain, Spain were like the two biggest empire, and French was also competing there, but the British were like the bigger enemy between these two, and so French was like, hey, we need to get together to fight this threat, and so they do. And the first pact with the Bourbons to Spain was basically was out of necessity, politically so. And so, like, around the second pact, it also helped Spain recover a lot of territory that they lost during conflict with the British. And so when Vasconcelos says that when they made a pact with the French, it was a mistake, is because there were certain conflicts in Europe that Spain was being distracted to, that basically costed them. Because when you got to think about that, Spain's major economic investment was not in the peninsula. Like, this is a mistake. Like, the major economic gain that Spain depended upon is in the Americas, like the Indias. And so for Spain to, like, allocate a lot of time and distraction and the European internal conflicts and prolonging these Bourbon pacts, because France was also part of these conflicts that Spain was getting distracted on. Vasconcelos said this is one mistake, and it came to bite them in the ass, and rightfully so. Like, around the time that the second Bourbon pact was on play, there were certain administrative mess that was going on in the Americas that Spain did not necessarily did the right thing to do, and it didn't manage it well, and it ended up balkanizing the Central America and South America, and the entire mess just went downhill from there, and that's why Vasconcelos is saying what he's saying, because Spain's pacts, they should have been shorter than what happened in history. Like just after, I think for Vasconcelos, he thinks that once Spain was able to recover a lot of the territory from North America, like Louisiana and the Baja and Alta California, like I think to Vasconcelos, Spain should just back off from the pact and focus completely on administrating the Americas. But shit happened, and everything Vasconcelos described in that quote, in that passage, is basically what was the mistake that the Spain committed.
Yeah, great commentary. Absolutely. So I'm going to read this passage here, which I think is interesting because it touches on a revelation that we sort of stumbled upon doing like research on the story of Martin Cortez, Hernan Cortez's son, and sort of like what was going on regarding the power relations with the conquistadors of Mexico and the actual Spanish crown. And these two groups did not see eye to eye with each other. So let me read what I mean here. So it says, the Spaniards went to the New World with the overflow of vigor left after the success of the Reconquista. Free men like Cortez, Pizarro, Alvarado, and Belalcázar were not Caesars nor lackeys, but great captains that joined destructive impetus to creative genius. Immediately after victory, they traced the plans of the new cities and wrote the statutes of their foundation. Later, at the hour of bitter disputes with the metropolis, they knew how to return insult for insult, as did one of the Pizarros in a famous trial. They all felt equal before the king, like the Cid, like the great writers of the Golden Age felt, as all free men during epochs of greatness. But as the conquest was being completed, the new organization began to fall into the hands of courtiers and favorites of the king. Incompetent men, not only for conquest, but even for the defense of what others had conquered with their talent and courage, degenerate courtiers capable of oppressing and humiliating the natives, but submissive before the royal power. They and their masters did nothing else but spoil the work of Spanish genius in America. So what is Vasconcelos talking about here specifically? Well, it's this. It's the fact that the primary and most respected conquistadors like Hernan Cortez, like Pizarro got assassinated, but let's use Cortez specifically as the example here. When he took over, when he basically had his alliance with the other Indian tribes and was able to finally overthrow the Aztecs and to unite all of these different Indian tribes together as, actual Mexicans, right? Whenever this occurred, the Spanish crown was very, very much intent on limiting Cortez's power. Why? Because they were extremely worried that Hernan Cortez was going to make himself king or his son king and basically, break off from the Spanish Empire and create a new, essentially Mexican monarchy that would have combined the Iberians and the Mexican Indians under a new crown. I personally think that would have been awesome. In fact, I think this would have been better off for Mexico had this occurred. And it would have been a lot better for, planning things out in fighting the Anglo-Saxons and the French in the New World if they had centralized the crown in Mexico and had actually put the king in Mexico, if that makes sense. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. And I think as a result of, as a result of the Spanish crown essentially persecuting Hernan Cortez and the other conquistadors and replacing them with people that were yes men for the Spanish crown, it set the stage for, the New World in terms of the Spanish Empire to just not live up to its true potential, if that makes sense. Anything you guys want to add here to that?
So, you mentioned that there were conflicting interests between even the Spanish crown and the conquistadors, but what's surprising to learn is that prior to Cortez exploration to Tenochtitlan and Mesoamerica proper, there were even conspiracies and there were even conspiracies between conquistadors and royal assets of the crown, and one of the best examples that I have especially with this book I bought on the conquest and colonization of my island, is that Juan Ponce de Leon basically had to deal with a lot of slander and conspiracy against his campaign by other conquistadors, and not only that, but he also had to face certain rumor and false testimonies again from the sailors that were under Christopher Columbus administration. And so he had to go. He had to travel to the crown and to prove himself, and to prove himself legally. And so these conflicts have been going on even prior to Hernan Cortés shit show that with the crown. So it's very important to understand that it wasn't all happy exploration. I'm gonna conquer this place. There were a lot of conflicts and even politically among the Spaniards. It wasn't all Indio versus Spaniards. Even Spaniards had to deal with bullshit within their own squad mates and viceroyal admins. So yeah, it was very interesting to know.
Thank you. Yeah, great input again. Kind of going into the intricacies of what's going on and sort of I guess power struggles that were going on internally there. So let me read this quote here, which I like because he's kind of talking about these pygmies even from back then. So it says here, on the other hand, we Spaniards by blood or by culture, and I just want to make something very clear before I continue reading this. I noticed one of the top sort of, I guess, criticisms that I saw when I was watching another book review on this essay, essentially, was the main complaint was that, Vasconcelos is Eurocentric, this is bad, we're indigenous, this oppresses us. It's okay, first off, we need to be adults for one fucking second here. The New World, whether you're talking about Canada, to Chile, all the way down, and everything in between, for the most part, is a Eurocentric world. That's the reality. That is what it is. You can like it, you can hate it, but that is the reality. And we have to accept that that's the way things are. There is a reason people speak Spanish in Latin America and why people speak English, in North America. And, it's not you don't need to put a value judgment on whether that's a good thing or bad thing. It's just, this is the way the world is. Yes, culturally, Latin America is insanely influenced by Spain of the past. And, there definitely were things like Indian republics and things like that existed throughout the empire, in which you had areas where Indians who wanted to, I guess, be living in their own autonomous regions, be ruled by their chiefs, and speak their own languages up till the 1700s in the Spanish Empire. Yes, this was a thing. But at the same time, even this was something in which it was heavily syncretized with the metaphysical reality that people from Spain also accepted, which was Catholicism and still is. You visit Indian villages to this day in Latin America, and the vast majority of them are, these are going to be some of the most Catholic people you're going to see on the planet, or some of the most Christian people. A lot of them are converting to Protestantism now. But the point is that this is where you see some of the most devout, legitimately, traditional people in Latin America. And this is not a bad thing that these are Hispanicized Indians. I don't feel bad that they're not pagans anymore. I think Catholicism was a great way of uniting a lot of people in the empire. And, I'm not going to cry about the fact that this is the way things kind of turned out. So anything we want to add to that before I continue? Actually, I just realized I wasn't done reading. So it says here, we Spaniards by blood or by culture began by denying our traditions at the moment of our emancipation. We broke off with the past, and some even denied their blood, saying it would have been better if the conquest of our regions had been accomplished by the English.
Oh my God!
Isn't that?
Oh God!
Okay, so
Oh my God!
So I want to comment on this because this was in the 1920s or something. Vasconcelos was early 90s.
A long time ago.
Yeah. Okay. So picture this. Today,
that's like let's say like 200 not 200 like 150 years old. Let's just say like a roughly 180 150 years ago. So this is 100 or so 50 years ago. Today we have indigenistas saying the exact same thing. Ay, que ojalá no conquistara los ingleses. Oh, I wish the Americans would have conquered us. And Vasconcelos is saying in here, like, you people have no fucking clue what the fuck you're talking about. Like, Vasconcelos is basically saying in a professional philosophical intricacy that you people are fucking retards. Like, he's calling people saying this fucking retards because Vasconcelos saw that the colonization process of the British was completely different from the Spaniards. Like, okay, complain whatever you want with how there were some instances of some conquistadors. Like, yeah, there were bad conquistadors. There's some shitty stuff about the Indians. Yeah, go cry about that. But we're talking about net results here. Like,
I mean, those again, we just went over this. Those conquistadors got thrown out of power and got replaced by yes men like immediately.
Exactly.
So it's like if you have a bone to pick with Spain, and there's a lot of legitimate bones you can actually pick with Spain. It's the criollos. But the thing is, the criollos run Latin America for the most part, and they don't want you to put the fucking spotlight on them. They want you to believe in this myth that Spain was the one responsible for everything, despite the fact that Spain allowed these Indian republics to exist. Spain made it illegal for Indians to be able to sell their land to other people because there were going to be predatory people that were obviously going to try to use shady tactics to take their land. This large situation in Latin America where Indians started to lose their land in very large numbers occurred after the independence movements. It may have not even been intentional by some of these people. Bolivar may not have even wanted that initially, but that was the result of what occurred.
Oh, and Guillermo, now that you talk about that, I want you to highlight a spicy comment from Dominican Warrior. Like, highlight that little comment right there. I want people see here. This is the same. This is the guy that Vasconcelos has in mind, telling us. Dominican Warrior, if you're listening, you're the type of people that Vasconcelos would call you a retard because
based Oppenheimer, just try not to use the R word as much. The YouTube gets
okay.
Really
sorry, YouTube. Sorry, YouTube. We'll file a complaint that you're a white supremacist too. Anyways, but the Dominican Warrior, you're the type of person who will say that I wish us Dominicans will be colonized by the English. And let me tell you something, Dominican Warrior. If the English were to colonize you, you wouldn't be here saying race mixing is bad. Like, no. Like you need to deal with it that you're a Dominican. You are a burnt a spig. You're a burnt beaner to the Afro-Saxons of in North America. Like, you're just as mixed as all the other light-skinned Dominicans around you. Like, you have to face this reality. Like, if you were not under the Spanish Empire, you wouldn't exist. Like, this is the reality. Like I said, complain all you want. Like, with all the the abuses that might have happened by bad conquistadors, but we're talking about net results here. Like, the net result, like, those conquistadors were eventually found justice among other prominent leaders that did actually were concerned about the Indians' well-being, and their justice was served. And here you are typing on YouTube how you wish you were a British admin. Like, I'm sorry, you're not a British admin, you're a broke Indio, and you're complaining that you wish you were part of the Indian Empire. You were probably going to be thrown to a concentration camp like all the other beaners who were also light skinned. So yeah, continue on, Guillermo.
Absolutely, yeah. So it says here, at any rate,
can I add real quick? Or just real
quick?
Of
course. My Zombo freshness man, Marcus.
Hello.
Welcome to the show. We're always
personified.
Hell yeah, for real.
No, man. I just think it's funny, like, when I read like kind of the comments. for one, I kind of just like to look at a more materialist perspective, and like when I talk to more like the indigenista types, and they're just like,
so everybody understands. Marcos is our resident, unironic Mexican communist, but I am not a communist myself. But it's like we enjoy diversity of opinions here. I just want to make
yeah,
it
I
very
think
clear.
that when it comes to things like this, just to kind of like put a footnote on that is like these conversations that we have about like Hispanidad or whatever larger cultural stuff is like politics is kind of out of it. We're just kind of talking about culture in a sense. You know, obviously we're going to touch on politics because we all love politicking, but that's not the point, you know. So that's why I like kind of jumping into these kind of talks and talking to y'all. But yeah, getting back to it when I'm like these indigenistas talk about like, oh, the Spaniards did this, that, or whatever, which again, like you said, I think all of us recognize that there are genuine, like, you know, bones to pick with them. I always like to ask them a question like, yeah, okay, and what? You know, like, you could, even if it was like the worst of the worst, like the way that you imagine it, like there's no, you holding that moralistic position towards the past doesn't reconcile it at all. You know, it still is what it is. It happened. And I think that we just have to kind of observe it in a more neutral, kind of sober sense and understand like what is the true history here, and you know, not like, and have like an understanding of our heritage so we could like come out of it with some sort of pride or some sort of understanding of what we come from, first of all. So I would like push that towards both these camps of the indigenistas and whoever this Dominican guy was that just said whatever the fuck he said. Like, no, dude, you have to really look at it like, if like, I think he said, who the person speaking before me said it best, like if you were really wishing you were British, you would not exist, essentially. You know,
that, or you'd be like Jamaican or something. And
yeah, exactly. You'd be some sort of like just black guy in the South, maybe, you know, like, I don't know.
Exactly. And so it says here, at any rate, the anti-Hispanic preaching and the corresponding anglicizing, skillfully spread by the English themselves, perverted our judgment from the beginning. And then we have another quote that I want to point out here. It says, our war of independence was limited by provincialism and by the absence of transcendental plans. The race that had dreamed of a world empire, that presumed to be the descendants of Roman glory, fell into the puerile satisfaction of creating little nations and sovereign principalities, encouraged by mentalities that saw a wall and not a summit in each mountain range. Our liberators, with the illustrious exceptions of Bolivar and Sucre, the Black Petion, and no more than half a dozen others, were dreaming of Balkan glories. The rest, obsessed with the local outlook and entangled in a confused pseudo-revolutionary phraseology, simply busied themselves in belittling a conflict that could have been the beginning of the awakening of a whole continent. To divide, to tear to pieces, the dream of a great Latin confederation seemed to have been the goal of some of the ignorant practical men who fought for independence. Although they deserved their place of honor in this movement, they did not know how to follow, or did not even want to listen to the wise warnings of Bolivar. So let me just say this right here. I think it's interesting that he actually brought up the Balkans, because this is something that actually I would touch down on a lot, which is the fact that when were the Balkan people, you know, doing their best in sort of like recently in history, in any sort of time? And Marcus can touch on this because he's actually Slavic. It's when they had Tito. Whenever they had Yugoslavia, which was a united confederation around an iron-fisted communist dictator that made their living standards insanely higher and made them a respected country, no, not country, but I guess communist confederation that was neither subservient to the USSR or to China or to the United States. Once essentially Tito died and Yugoslavia started to further fragment, and then eventually had the Balkan Wars following the end of communism, the Balkaners have now been more relevant now than ever before and poorer now than ever before. And this is the sort of thing that I'm trying to say and that I'm trying to drill into all of your heads is this. Why do you want to be a bunch of irrelevant little Balkanized states when a confederation is something that would genuinely help Latin America more than anything else? That's the point I'm trying to make. Whether you believe in a communist confederation, whether you believe in something else, it's the fact that, like, why is America able to dominate Latin America and even much of the world? Well, it's because these are 50 states that are entirely unified, and let's just be honest, Canada is also thrown into there as well. And Latin America is just a bunch of independent countries that just are all looking out for themselves. Well, when you have one divided confederation, or if you have one united confederation or federation like the United States, I wouldn't call it a confederation, it's a federation. Then you have Latin America. Well, obviously the united, part of the world is going to just bully all these, divided places. And that's why even in places like for example, like in right now with the Ukraine and Russia conflict, NATO is trying to convince the Ukraine to join NATO or to just be its own independent country because, that's how you're going to break up Russia. That's how you're going to destroy what's left of the Russian Empire that was reached its fullest stage under the USSR, in my opinion. And it's by just further fragmenting these states or getting them to just join NATO outright. And who knows, maybe America is going to have the goal of trying to balkanize maybe a bunch of parts of northern Mexico and to start annexing them at some point. I could totally see this within the next century or so. Any thoughts on that before we continue? I mean, there's a lot to break down, obviously, with what I just said there.
Yeah, I would agree about like pretty much all of it. Like the annexations of northern Mexico, I wouldn't be shocked if things like that happen. I think that we kind of get bogged down so much in like our differences, and like I could say this as a Mexican, we're probably the worst ones at it. We probably do it more than anybody else. Like if you're in a Telegram group with me, I know I'm annoying with that shit, so you know me. But anyways, I think that it's just kind of logical to understand that we united would be, even if we would probably still be under the dominion of the United States because it is like, the global hegemon or whatever, we would be much more like mighty as a unified force, much harder to bully. And I think that culturally, I think like ultimately, like we would have a system, and this isn't just me being a fucking commie because I am open to like other towards the systems, but we would have a federation sort of like the USSR where you have like countries that have their own sovereignty, but like joined within a larger federation that kind of takes care of all this stuff. We'd have to be much more heavily militarized and things like that too. But I think that we have to kind of like start looking forward towards a future independent from A, the IMF, B, the United States as like, capital providing loans to countries and thinking that's going to be your way out. I think large populist movements need to emerge within these countries, and then these populist movements need to have a more unifying kind of project at hand, I guess.
Very well put. Marcus, since you're the resident Slav here, is there anything you want to chime in regarding what we've said before we continue?
Well, I mean, yeah, you talk about we guys talked about like the little Latin American countries and how they're just basically, easy pickings for, say, the American Empire, right? I mean, the same applies to the Slavic countries, whether we're talking the Balkans or Eastern Europe in general after the Soviet Union and the Iron Curtain fell apart. I mean, all the way up now, NATO has moved all the way up to the border of Ukraine. These little countries, a lot of them have Western troops on their soil, American weapons, keep their militaries going. And really, at that point, you just become to be blunt, you become the bitches of the United States. I mean, which European country in the East actually has independence when you think about it, right? None. They'll let a few like Hungary, or Poland, run their mouth a little bit. But even in Poland, once the anti-gay stuff became too inconvenient, they cracked down on it. They basically, a demand was made. It's time to soften up a little bit, and they're starting to soften up. They don't actually have foreign policy or domestic policy decision-making ability. It's once you get to that level, you become easy prey for the larger empire.
Exactly. Very well put. And I'm going to read this paragraph here that's going to be a little long, but I think it's good. Such aberrations may also be explained because the indigenous element had not and has not yet been fused in its totality with the Spanish blood. But this discord is more apparent than real. Should one talk to the most exalted Indianist of the convenience of adapting ourselves to Latinism, he will raise no questions. But tell him that our culture is Spanish, and he will immediately bring up counter-arguments. The stain from the spilled blood still remains. It is an accursed stain that centuries have not erased, but which the common danger must annul. There is no other recourse. Even the pure Indians are Hispanicized. They are Latinized, just as the environment itself is Latinized. Say what one may, the red men, the illustrious Atlanteans from whom Indians derive, went to sleep millions of years ago, never to awaken. There is no going back in history, for it is all transformation and novelty. No race returns. Each one states its mission, accomplishes it, and passes away. The truth rules in biblical times as well as in our times. All the ancient historians have formulated it. The day of the pure whites, the victors of today, are as numbered as were the days of their predecessors. Having fulfilled their destiny of mechanizing the world, they themselves have set, without knowing it, the basis for a new period, the period of the fusing and mixing of all peoples. The Indian has no other door to the future but the door of modern culture, nor any other road but the road already cleared by Latin civilization. The white man as well will have to depose his pride and look for progress and ulterior redemption in the souls of his brothers from other castes. He will have to diffuse and perfect himself in each of the superior varieties of the species, in each of the modalities that multiply revelation and make genius more powerful. So anything you guys want to add to that? It's definitely a very controversial paragraph, even for a lot of different groups.
Yes. There was like very early on in the passage, he mentioned something very interesting, and it might even hurt. I think he like stabbed the indigenistas right in the heart, like right in the guts. He said, even the pure Indian is Hispanized. Like, now think about that for a moment. Like, I'm gonna give an example of from my own island, because the Antilles indigenous, the Taínos, even if for the sake of argument you could point that there are some tribal, look, I found the pure Taino at some mountainous region at Puerto Rico. Like, even if you could find it, like the majority of these people they will term themselves Hibaro more than, like they will just adopt more the Hibaro culture, and that's basically a Hispanized Taino. Like, the reality that these indigenistas have to understand is that the irony of the Hispanic monarchy is that any surviving indigenous tribes that could possibly be considered extinct, they exist thanks to the Hispanization that they went through generations after generations. Like, the most, at least in my island, the most Jibaro Puerto Rican actually has grandparents. I'm talking about great grandparents, like 2 or 3 generations ago, like that they were tribal Taínos proper, but they were Hispanized even back then. Like, you could even see very old photos, like early 1900s photos of actual tribal Taínos in Cuba, but the way they dress, the way that they, how cultured they are, they're all Hispanized. Like, you could see the shinky features that they had, but they were all Hispanized. Like, they conserved some of their, indigenous proper culture, like they could conserve some of their dialect, they conserve some of their some of their dressing patterns, all that they conserve those key vestiges, but at the end of the day that they're just as Hispanized as the rest of the population. Like, that's what Vasconcelos is trying to make you all understand, that even the most conserved tribal culture that you can point to, even on Mexico, like this is Vasconcelos, a proper Mexican. Like, he could tell you that, even the purest Aztec is Hispanized. And that's a reality that people have to understand. Like, that the most ironic thing about the Hispanic Empire, with all these flaws and with all these dark moments, their Hispanization, ironically, was their greatest conservation attempt to respect indigenous tribes. Like, that's something that's very deep to understand.
Thank you for that. What you just timed in there. So I'm going to keep reading here. So this is going to be pretty good. It says, it seems as if God himself guided the steps of the Anglo-Saxon cause, while we kill each other on account of dogma or declare ourselves atheists. How those mighty empire builders must laugh at our groundless arrogance and Latin vanity. They do not clutter their mind with the Ciceronian weight of phraseology, nor have they in their blood the contradictory instinct of a mixture of dissimilar races. But they have committed the sin of destroying those races while we assimilated them. And this gives us new rights and hopes for a mission without precedent in history. For this reason, adverse obstacles do not move us to surrender, for we vaguely feel that they will help us to discover our way. Precisely in our differences, we find the way. If we simply initiate, we lose. If we discover and create, we shall overcome. The advantage of our tradition is that it has greater facility of sympathy towards strangers. This implies that our civilization, with all its defects, may be the chosen one to assimilate and to transform mankind into a new type. That within our civilization, the warp, the multiple and rich plasma of future humanity is thus being prepared. So I want to make this very clear for everybody listening. This is sort of the central thesis of the Raza Cósmica. And it's basically this. It's basically Jose Vasconcelos, 100 years ago, saying, this is the momento hispano. This is the Hispanic moment that we have, the opportunity that is being presented towards Hispanic America. We're at a crossroads right now. We can take this opportunity and capitalize on it, or we will just become just completely irrelevant mestizos who just act like North Americans for the most part, even if they speak Spanish. So again, this is where we're at. And, we'll see where things go. There's a good chance that we don't end up successful.
Strangely enough, like that's a common thing throughout, like anybody who talks about like Iberoamerica or like Latin America, as we call it. Because I don't have the quotes with me, but I wish I did. But I also recall reading The Labyrinth of Solitude by Octavio Paz, which is much more Mexican centric. But of course, if you're Mexican centric, it's gonna apply more broadly to Latin America. And he talks about kind of the same thing about it's like, this is a moment we have all these things setting us up to be able to be successful, but we don't capitalize on it. And I think it does come from that like Republican kind of thinking about like not thinking more broadly and not thinking more like how could we apply, like how could we reach out a little bit more. And I think that so much damage to these kind of like potentials has been caused by like reaching out the hand to the gringo, as I like to think about it. It's like, hey, my country or even my own little business will get their own loan from the IMF or from United States and we'll be good, and there's not enough broad thinking of like, if we were to all kind of band together, we have a perfect opportunity to take over or to at least have our own thing on the par of, Anglo-America, of Europe, of even China, And I think it's a sad story of Latin America of like missed opportunity.
Absolutely, 100%. So I'm going to keep reading here. It says, this mandate from history is first noticed in that abundance of love that allowed the Spaniard to create a new race with the Indian and the Black, profusely spreading white ancestry through the soldier who begat a native family, and Occidental culture through the doctrine and example of the missionaries who placed the Indians in condition to enter into the new stage, the stage of World One. Spanish colonization created mixed races. This signals its character, fixes its responsibility, and defines its future. The English kept on mixing only with the whites and annihilated the natives. Even today, they continue to annihilate them in a sordid and economic fight, more efficient yet than armed conquest. This proves their limitation and is indication of their decadence. The situation is equivalent, in a larger scale, to the incestuous marriages of the pharaohs, which undermined the virtues of the race, and it contradicts the ulterior goals of history to attain the fusion of peoples and cultures. To build an English world and to exterminate the red man, so that Northern Europe could be renovated all over in America made up with pure whites, is no more than a repetition of the triumphant process of a conquering race. This was already attempted by the red man and by all strong and homogeneous races, but it does not solve the human problem. America was not kept in reserve for 5,000 years for such a petty goal. The purpose of the new and ancient continent is much more important. Its predestination obeys the design of constituting the cradle of a fifth race, into which all nations will fuse each other to replace the 4 races which have been forging history apart from each other. The dispersion will come to an end on American soil. Unity will be consummated there by the triumph of fecund love and the improvement of all the human races. In this fashion, the synthetic race that shall gather all the treasures of history in order to give expression to universal desire shall be created. The so-called Latin peoples, because they have been more fruitful to their divine mission in America, are the ones called upon to consummate this mission. Such fidelity to the occult design is the guarantee of our triumph. Anything you guys want to add to that real quickly?
Yeah, I wanted to say I've mostly not been around.
Ahmed, I'm sorry, but this is not a stream for you. No offense. Like, we're not doing this. No offense. Sorry.
Okay,
Anyone else
I
besides Ahmed?
appreciate.
I'm sorry, but like, I have agreed on who's going to be on the show already, and Ahmed was not one of these people. So please, somebody else. No hard feelings on my end. It's just like, we already agreed. Anyone else? No?
So, you were gonna go, MC?
Yeah, I think Marcos was gonna go.
No, you can
No?
go ahead. I'm good. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, Vasconcelos is saying that the homogenization project that, and I think with this we can do a quick smooth transition about what Vasconcelos thinks about the mestizaje and the mixture of races, but it's closer to it. It's that Vasconcelos is saying that this project of each race is what he terms that the only project that they do is just propagate the same group of people as a way to build civilization. To Vasconcelos is that there were other people prior to them that they did this, but their empire didn't last so much. And one of the examples he gives, and I think it's in the first chapter, very later on, is the example of the Macedonian Empire, where basically the Hellenization of Alexander the Great was the reason why these different ethnic groups, like, they were able to fuse their culture, and so their empire was able to survive much better and thrive better than these individual empires simply propagating the same culture, the same civilization. Whereas for Vasconcelos, the future of greater, more superior civilization is basically repeating the same thing that the Roman Empire and the Macedonian Empire did, which is the fusion of cultures. And so when you think about it, Vasconcelos isn't saying anything new. Like the fusion of cultures, how civilization and empires building from taking other ethnic groups and combining their culture. This is something that has been happening since Rome was a relevant superpower, even before that. So to Vasconcelos is that the Raza Cósmica is more civilizational project that to him may even surpass the greatness of the Roman Empire, but they have the precepts, they have the precedent of that civilization. If that makes sense.
No, that's great, and I'm going to continue here. So there's an interesting part right after where he's kind of again, he's not a big fan of the independence movements, but he does credit them for a few things, and here's what I'm talking about here. It says, yet it is also surprising to observe that almost all of them felt animated by a humane and universal sentiment which coincides with the destiny that today we assign to the Latin American continent. Hidalgo, Morelos, Bolivar, Petion de Haitian, the Argentinians in Tucumán, Sucre, all were concerned with the liberation of the slaves, with the declaration of equality of all men by natural right, and with the civil and social equality of whites, blacks, and Indians. In a moment of historical crisis, they formulated the transcendental mission assigned to the region of the globe, the mission of fusing all peoples ethnically and spiritually. So I think what he's sort of alluding to here is the fact that, towards the end of the Spanish Empire, Indians were still a plurality of the people that existed all across Latin America. Most people don't know this. Mestizos were a minority ethnically and racially during the entirety of the Spanish Empire. Criollos were much smaller, and then actual Spaniards in Latin America were even smaller than the Criollos by quite a bit. So it was not until the independence movements sort of came about in which mass immigration from Spain and other European countries as well, but Spain especially from the 1800s to 1900s, my own ancestors included that are from Spain that married Muisca Indians. They came in during this time. And this is when the vast majority of mestizos that exist today, when their ancestors became mestizos, the overwhelming majority of them, it came from after these independence movements, from immigrants from Spain primarily that mixed with natives. And this is and he basically, I think he's giving them credit for this, essentially. Anything you guys want to add to that before we continue?
No.
Wonderful. So let's go on. It says here, thus what no one even thought of doing on the Anglo-Saxon area of the continent was done on the Latin side. In the north, the contrary thesis continued to prevail. The confessed or tacit intention of cleansing the earth of Indians, Mongolians, or blacks for the greater glory and fortune of the whites. In fact, since that time, the systems which, continuing to the present, have placed the two civilizations on opposing sociological fields were very well defined. The one wants exclusive dominion by the whites, while the other is shaping a new race, a synthetic race, which aspires to engulf and to express everything human in forms of constant improvement. And then it says here, if it were necessary to adduce proof, it would be sufficient to observe the increasing and spontaneous mixing which occurs among all peoples in all of the Latin continent, in contrast with the inflexible line that separates the blacks from the whites in the United States, and the laws, each time more rigorous, for the exclusion of the Japanese and Chinese from California. The so-called Latins insist on not taking the ethnic factor too much into account for their sexual relations. Perhaps because from the beginning they are not, properly speaking, Latins, but a conglomeration of different types and races. Whatever opinions one may express in this respect, and whatever repugnance caused by prejudice one may harbor, the truth is that the mixture of races has taken place and continues to be consummated. It is in this fusion of ethnic stocks that we should look for the fundamental characteristic of Ibero-American idiosyncrasy. It may happen sometime, and in fact, it has already happened, that economic competition may force us to close our doors, as is done by the Anglo-Saxons, to an unrestrained flux of Asians. But in doing so, we obey reasons of economic order. We recognize that it is not fair that people like the Chinese, who under the saintly guidance of Confucian morality, multiply like mice, should come to degrade the human condition precisely at the moment when we begin to understand that intelligence serves to refrain and regulate the lower zoological instincts, which are contrary to a truly religious conception of life. If we reject the Chinese, it is because man, as he progresses, multiplies less and feels the horror of numbers for the same reason that he has begun to value quality. In the United States, Asians are rejected because of the same fear of physical overflow, characteristics of superior stocks, but also because Americans simply do not like Asians, even despise them, and would be incapable of intermarriage with them. The ladies of San Francisco have refused to dance with the officials of the Japanese Navy, who are men as clean, intelligent, and in their own ways handsome as those of any other navy in the world. Yet these ladies will never understand that a Japanese may be handsome. Nor is it easy to convince the Anglo-Saxons that if the yellow and black races have their characteristic smell, the whites for a foreigner also have theirs, even though we may not be aware of it. In Latin America, the repulsion of one blood that confronts another strange blood also exists, but infinitely more at two end. There, 1,000 bridges are available for the sincere and cordial fusion of all races. So there's a lot to unpack with what we just read there. Anything you guys want to comment on?
So yeah, this is a perfect opportunity to transition to the core thesis of Vasconcelos, because what Vasconcelos talked about there was was an introduction to what the core thesis of the mestizaje he talks about. And so I have it right here. It's basically on the third chapter. It's the first page, the first 3 pages of of that chapter 3. And so I will basically summarize it. So when Vasconcelos speaks about the fusion of cultures, which whether cultural or racially, however you want to call it, for Vasconcelos, there are three. He calls them three stages, but we can just also call it the three routes of how one can take mestizaje to be. And the first route, he says, is like purely purely primitive, all driven by sexual desires. Like to Vasconcelos, this is basically like unstable, like because you're basically mixing out of sexual necessity. Like you're basically fetishizing the one you're mixing, and I think this is the route that the reactionaries say why race mixing is bad. But then the second route that Vasconcelos criticizes is the one that Wignatz always opt the most, which is what he calls the rationalist route, or the Darwinian route, which is basically you're always wanting to preserve your own. It's basically the homogeneity tendency of the Anglo-Saxon, which is you're only going to mix with people who have certain biological tendencies or necessities, and if your race mix with other races so completely different from yours, well, your generation is gonna look wacky or whatever. And so Vasconcelos criticizes that very same route. Like he doesn't view mestizaje as this biological Darwinian project that that the Anglo-Saxon is so fond of. The third route, which is the core of Vasconcelos' main thesis on mestizaje, is that what he calls the aesthetic route. And it's simply put, like Vasconcelos sees the fusion of cultures and races, because you have some races, some ethnic groups have good qualities that other ethnic groups don't have, and so when you mix them, like to him, like the offspring will come out to be a better of the two fusion, like mejorar la raza. And so that's basically the concept behind all of that. Like is an aesthetic tendency to you want to mix because you see something more transcendent. It's more about the beauty. It's more about something more platonic of why you want to like race mix. Like it's more an aesthetic and platonic, and what he calls something more based on love and friendship. And so that's the main thesis of Vasconcelos. That's the main thesis of why, to him, mestizaje, race mixing, was so key and successful to the Spanish Empire. The Spanish Empire ultimately viewed mestizaje this way. Like they didn't view mestizaje based on that India looks so good, I'm gonna fuck her or whatever, or the Anglo-Saxon Darwinian framework where they only want to mix because.
To be fair, I think there was plenty of that,
Oh, I'm sorry. Is it me I'm lagging, or is it Guillermo?
No, it was the Zombo. Repeat what you had to say, Marcus.
Well, anyways,
I said to be fair, there was plenty of that. As far as like the India is fine and I want to fuck her.
I mean, like that can, like you can, like, obviously that can be on you or whatever, but to Vasconcelos, like the net result of why the Spanish Empire did what they did is ultimately because it was more based on aesthetic, it was more based on generating a civilization. Like it was more aesthetic, more based on we're unifying the best that we have. That I have this and you don't, so let's fuse together and share what we have, what we don't have, to build a civilization. Basically, like to Vasconcelos, the mestizaje was more to build a civilization. Well, and so that's the main thesis of the mestizaje aspect of Raza Cósmica.
Yeah, very well put. So I'm going to read here. This is going to be the end of this chapter, and we're already like halfway through what we need to read through. So again, this is not a huge essay. That's why we can read a lot more passages. So it says, how different the sounds of the Ibero-American development. They resemble the profound scherzo of a deep and infinite symphony, Voices that bring accents from Atlantis, depths contained in the pupil of the red man, who knew so much, so many thousands years ago, and now seems to have forgotten everything. His soul resembles the old Mayan cenote of green waters, laying deep and still in the middle of the forest, for so many centuries since that not even its legends remain anymore. This infinite quietude is stirred with the drop put in our blood by the black, eager for sensual joy, intoxicated with dances and unbridled lust. There also appears the Mongol, with the mystery of his slanted eyes that see everything according to a strange angle. And I discover I know not what I know not what folds and newer dimensions. The clear mind of the white that resembles his skin and his dreams also intervenes. Judaic stry hidden within the Castilian blood since the days of the cruel expulsion now reveal themselves, along with Arabian melancholy, as a reminder of the sickly Muslim sensuality. Who has not a little of all this, or does not wish to have all? There is the Hindu, who also will come, who has already arrived by the way of spirit, although he is the last one to arrive. He seems the closest relative. So many races that have come, and others that will come. In this manner, a sensitive and ample heart will be taking shape within us. A heart that embraces and contains everything and is moved with sympathy, but full of vigor, imposes new laws upon the world. And we foresee something like another head that will dispose of all angles in order to fulfill the miracle of surpassing the sphere. So yeah, there's a lot of, I guess, quotes in there that a lot of people would call problematic. What do you guys think about that, though?
Yeah, I think the whole describing the Mongols eye shape is probably what threw off a lot of people out there, where that's where they think the so-called white liberals United States may call Vasconcelos race. Oh, he described the Mongol with this way, and that's yeah, well, whatever. Like, the point of Vasconcelos here is that, every ethnic group has some quality that unique to them, and so Vasconcelos asks us very firmly, like, who doesn't wish to have all this? Like why not? Like, let's share all the best that we have, even if it's something so small, but it's basically everything that about mixing what's the best of us and creating our civilization. And so he lists all those examples that he thinks are very unique and maybe interesting, maybe intriguing, maybe funny, but he describes them and he said, let's have all this. Like, this is what we're gonna make. We're gonna make a new race. We're gonna make a new civilization, and so why not have these traits?
Absolutely. Thanks again for chiming in. So we're in the second chapter now, and it says here, out of the 3 chapters that are there, and I'm going to start with this quote that says, "The triumph of the whites began with the conquest of snow and cold. The basis of white civilization is fuel. First, it served as a protection against the long winters. Then it was discovered that its power could be used not only for warmth, but also for work. And the motor was born. And so it is that from the hearth and the stove proceed all the machinery that is transforming the world. A simple invention would have been impossible in warm Egypt, and in fact did not occur there, despite the fact that the Egyptians infinitely surpassed the intellectual capacity of the English race." And it says, on the other hand, the English ship, that marvelous machine that proceeds from the Vikings of the North, was not even dreamed of by the Egyptians. The rude fight against the environment forced the whites to devote their aptitudes to the conquest of temporal nature. And it's precisely this what constitutes their contribution to the civilization of the future. The whites taught the control of matter. The science of the whites will someday revert to the method employed to attain control over fire, and instead will make use of condensed snows, electrochemical currents, or subtle magic gases to destroy flies and pests and dissipate the sultry weather and the fevers. Then the whole world will spread over the tropics, and in the solemn immensity of the landscapes, souls will continue plenitude. At the beginning, the whites will try to take advantage of their inventions for their own benefit. But since science is no longer esoteric, it is not likely that they will succeed. They will be absorbed in the avalanche of all the other races, and finally, deposing their pride, they will combine with the rest to make the new racial synthesis the fifth race of the future. The conquest of the tropics will transform all aspects of life. The pyramid will again develop. Colonnades and perhaps spiral constructions will be raised in useless ostentation of beauty because the new aesthetics will try to adapt itself to the endless curve of the spiral, which represents the freedom of desire and the triumph of being and the conquest of infinity. Reality will be like fantasy. The aesthetics of cloudiness and grays will be seen as the sickly art of the past. A refined and intense civilization will answer to these splendors of a nature swollen with potency, habitually generous, and shining with clarity. The panorama of present-day Rio de Janeiro or Santos, Brazil, with the city and the bay, can give us an idea of what the future emporium of the integral race that is to come will be like. So what do you guys think of that there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much anything to add. Like, he's just listing examples of what each ethnic group accomplished throughout history, and basically like giving examples of how he would incorporate that into his thesis on on mestizaje.
So here's an interesting prediction that Vasconcelos makes about the future, which I find is interesting. It says the promised land will be then in the region that today comprises all of Brazil, Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, part of Peru, part of Bolivia, and the upper region of Argentina. There is the danger that science may get ahead of the ethnic process so that the invasion of the tropics may take place before the fifth race is completely developed. If this should happen, wars will be waged for the possession of the Amazon, and their outcome will decide the destiny of the world and the fate of the definitive race. If the Amazon is dominated by the English, either of the islands or of the continent, both champions of the pure white, the emergence of the fifth race will remain defeated. But such an outcome would be absurd. History does not bend her ways. The English themselves would, in the new climate, become more malleable. They would become mestizos, but with them, the process of integration and improvement would be slower. It is preferable, then, that the Amazon remain Brazilian, or that it remain Iberian, together with the Orinoco and the Magdalena. With the resources from such region, the richest on earth, filled with all kinds of treasures, the synthetic race will be able to consolidate its culture. The world of the future will belong to whoever conquers the Amazon region. Universalis will rise by the great river, and from there the preaching squadrons and the airplanes propagating the good news will set forth. If the Amazon becomes English, the world metropolis would not become called Universal Polis, but Anglo-town. And the armies would come out of there to impose upon the other continents the harsh law of dominion by the blonde-haired whites and the extinction of their dark rivals. On the other hand, if the fifth race takes ownership of the access to the future world, then airplanes and armies will travel all over the planet, educating the people for their entry into wisdom. Life founded on love will come to be expressed in forms of beauty. Naturally, the fifth race will not pretend to exclude the whites, just as it does not propose to exclude any of the other races. Precisely, the norm of its formation is the use of all capacities for the greater integration of power. Our aim is not war against the whites, but against any kind of violent domination, be it either by the whites or, were Japan ever to become a continental danger, by the yellows. In regards to the whites and their culture, the fifth race already relies on them and still expects benefits from their genius. Latin America owes what it is to the white European and is not going to deny him. To the North Americans themselves, Latin America owes a great part of her railroads, bridges, and enterprises. By the same token, it needs all of the other races. However, we accept the superior ideals of the whites, but not their arrogance. We want to offer them, as well as to all other peoples, a free country where they will find a home and refuge, but not a continuation of their conquests. The whites themselves, unhappy with materialism and social injustice in which their race, the fourth race, has fallen, will come to us for help in this conquest of freedom. So there's a lot going on here, but I'm just curious what you two think about and Marcus can chime in too. Why do you think this guy would have, I don't know, predicted that the Amazon would be so important. What do you think it is about the Amazon that makes this something that he was so focused on? Because most of us don't assume the Amazon is the future of, I guess, the American continent, if that makes sense. That's usually not what most people think of.
Well, I could probably imagine that at the time that he wrote it, it was kind of like the most untouched, still kind of like this is what's left to be discovered by, like, you know, the Spanish Empire as far as the Amazon goes. Like, I would think that would be my prediction, given the context both of the time and like of the nature of the Amazon. Like, it just has like kind of this like, mysterious, you know, we haven't been there yet type of quality. I think that's probably what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. I mean, even now, it's still such a very untapped wilderness, in a way it's a good thing. But it still has like a mythical quality to it, just like even parts of Africa still do to this day, It's like dark Africa. It's something like out of legend, out of a Greek story or something.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks, guys. So this is an interesting sort of thing that I guess almost not a prediction, but he says maybe this might happen. So he says perhaps the traits of the white race will predominate among the characteristics of the fifth race. But, such a supremacy must be result of the free choice of personal taste and not the fruit of violence or economic pressure. The superior traits of culture and nature will have to triumph, but that triumph will be stable only if it is based on voluntary acceptance by conscious and on the free choice of fantasy. Up to this date, life has received its character from man's lower faculties. The fifth branch will be the fruit of these superior faculties. The fifth race does not exclude, but accumulates life. For this reason, the exclusion of the Yankee, like the exclusion of any other human type, would be equivalent to an anticipated mutilation, more deadly even than a later cut. If we do not want to exclude even the races that might be considered inferior, it would be much less sensible to keep from our enterprise a race full of vigor and solid social virtues. So yeah, that's basically the sort of thing where he's talking about, and
It's basically that. That's basically the culmination of his thesis, and it's also like a retcon of the very first paragraph he said on the first chapter of the nature of Catholicism, that is very much like an adoptive civilization. Like he said it right there. Like, we don't want to exclude. We accept the the superior ideals of the white Europeans, but we also don't want to accept the arrogance. Like, we want to adopt the best and interesting qualities of every other race that will give rise to the fifth race that he talks about. And so that Catholic nature of the mysticide that he talks about is very important, and he says it right there. Like, that's it. That's the thesis of that's the main heart of Raza Cósmica.
absolutely. So I'm going to read this end of chapter 2, and then we'll proceed to the last chapter, which is going to be chapter 3. So it says here, by comparison, the English practice of marrying only within the same stock may be seen as an ideal of refinement and purity. The primitive Aryans from Hindustan attempted precisely that English system in order to keep themselves from mixing with the colored races. However, since those dark races possessed the wisdom necessary to complement that of the blonde invaders, I guess he's referring to the Indo-Europeans that Slayer's a big fan of, the true Hindu culture was not produced until after the centuries had completed the mixture, in spite of all written prohibitions. Furthermore, the fateful mixture was useful not only for cultural reasons, but because the physical specimen itself needs to be renovated in its kin. North Americans have held very firmly to their resolution to maintain a pure stock. The reason being that they are faced with the blacks, who are like the opposite pole, like the antithesis of the elements to be mixed. In the Ibero-American world, the problem does not present itself in such crude terms. We have very few blacks, and a large part of them is already becoming a mulatto population. The Indian is a good bridge for racial mixing. Besides, the warm climate is propitious for the interaction and gathering of all peoples. On the other hand, and this is essential, interbreeding will no longer obey reasons of simple proximity, as occurred in the beginning when the white colonists took an Indian or black because there were no others at hand. In the future, as social conditions keep improving, the mixture of bloods will become gradually more spontaneous to the point of interbreeding, to the point that interbreeding will no longer be the result of simple necessity, but of personal taste or at least curiosity. Spiritual motivation in this manner will increasingly superimpose itself upon the contingencies of the merely physical. By spiritual motivation, we should understand, rather than reflective thinking, the faculty of personal taste that directs the mysterious selection of one particular person out of the multitude. So, I guess the general point that Vasconcelos is trying to wrap up this chapter with is saying that when the Spanish colonists, who were very few in number in a land that was majority Indian until the end of the Spanish Empire came, they had to mix with the blacks and the Indians that were there, because those were primarily, with some women from Europe that they brought over, the only options you really had. Vasconcelos is now talking about a future where, talking about even now in today's times, where there's going to be such an abundance of different people on this continent that it's not going to be just like you have to marry an Indian or a black. Maybe you can see someone from Uzbekistan or from this country or that country, and you're going to see, all of these different combinations of race mixing. And, to be quite honest, when I was in Los Angeles a few weeks ago, I feel like I was seeing that in real time to a certain degree. I was seeing, a lot of different interracial couples that you just wouldn't have ever expected to see 100 years ago on the American continent, especially in the United States, let alone Latin America. I mean, all sorts of different combinations. I mean, people that are half mestizo, half, German, marrying someone that's I guess Indian from India and mixed with maybe Chinese. You see all of these different mixtures, and maybe Marcos might want to chime in here since he's actually from Southern California.
No, yeah, you see people over here mixing all the time. It's very much par for the course. I have a few half black, half Mexican friends. I have Guatemalan and Korean friends. Yeah, it's a melting pot. You meet people from all sorts of admixtures around here. Yeah. I think it also has to do a lot with because I live in LA, and the LA metropolitan area is just such a hub for the world, that people come here for business or whatever, And yeah, so you meet people who were for example, one of my good friends, he's Algerian and Mexican, where the fuck would you ever think you'd meet that? And that's what
it's the same in my island. We even have Japanese and Chinese people, living here, assimilating my island, and they're even there's even a Chinese professor on my own university, trying to assimilate, this is something, Vasconcelos foresaw this.
Even outside of personal romances and couples and children, there's even fusion foods out here. So there's Korean barbecue tacos, for example, things like that. You just have people intermingling with one another.
Yeah, it's you even this is what Vasconcelos was saying. You're not just mixing, for mixing's sake. You interchange cultural aspects that are unique to your own culture, and what you said, a Korean barbecue taco, oh man.
Oh my god, I'm sorry.
Hey, can I comment on Intrepid Jaguar?
Oh, dude, I mean, I despise my own fans. Go for it, dude. I have no respect for the people
What
watching.
What did he say? He said you don't see any interracial relationships in red states?
Boy, you live in Alabama, Marcus. Why don't you talk about interracial relationships over there?
Well, I mean, I could go upstairs and wake up my 4-year-old. I mean, he's the product of one. I mean, no, white women down here, they love brown men. They don't like the cucked little soy boy white men who can't even grow a fucking beard anymore. They're so low T, right? I mean, and let's be real, the black and white mixing, it's always happened. I think segregation and things like that, Jim Crow kept it kind of low key, under the radar. But I mean, if you look around, you're going to see a lot of mulattoes in the South. There's a lot more than you might think. The average black has something 25% white genetics. I mean, there was mixing. There's always been mixing. There always will be.
Furthermore, I want to add something real quick. As far as you won't see interracial relationships in red states. I have some bad news for you. The biggest red state in the country is California. Sorry to inform you that, but it is.
Oh man, that was that was a nice jab there, man. But yeah, like but you know what? Now that we're talking about interracial relationships, basically this quip that these people, like, I assume he thinks he's a white, a castizo, whatever. But FBAs and ADOs have to also are also on alert, because and this stream was very recent, like, that almost 11-hour stream with Rancho. He asked this ADO, the future of the United States, whether the Anglo-Saxon or the Afro-Saxon likes it or not, it's the mulattoization of America, like the future, like, and Vasconcelos, and you read the quote, Guillermo, like, much earlier, like, the Anglo, sure, it's gonna take real slow because of his tendencies to, like, keep things segregated, but eventually, like, the mulattoization of America is gonna be inevitable. Like, you can't always segregate, forever and expect, that thing to say, like, you will eventually have a fusion, whether completely biological or eventually, cultural. Like with us Hispanics, like, it's been no problem. Like, we don't care. Like, we see it every day, and and in fact we see it so every day and so common that not even the dark skins here in Hispanic America mix with themselves. Like, negro no come negro. Like, you're going to see, you go to Colombia, you go to until you go anywhere with all the dark skins, man or woman, they're pairing up with the light skins. Like, they don't.
I mean,
care. Like,
Marcos,
it's very
Marcos is a Zombo, and most of the women he's dated in the past have been Gueras, which I think is funny.
Yo, bro, I don't appreciate you being the one to reveal that information, by the
Well,
way. But he's not wrong.
I'm not wrong.
I was
But
actually about to say that it's like it is
Yeah.
it's a funny anecdote for me. It's that, like, I'm a dark, like, I feel both Marcus and Guillermo know what I look like in real life at this point. And I'm like a dark skin, like, I look like an Indio with, like, a black eye face. It's like a real weird thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, my whole life I've always been more into, like, the Pocahontas or, like, the more mulata type girls, but they've never liked me back. It's weird, but it's always like the güeritas that like me, because we do have that thing of, like, the other. You want to chase the other. So yeah, for us, race mixing is not at all, like, taboo. It's not like, oh, weird. I don't understand where, like, kind of these sentiments come from, to be honest.
But it's like, it's what Rancho has been saying. Like, it's this fetish taboo segregationism that the Anglos biting them in the ass, and and so Vasconcelos has foresaw this. Like, their segregationism is going to fall apart. And so ADOs and Anglo-Saxons together, they're seeing it. They're seeing it right before their eyes, and they can complain all they want. Oh, rape is bad. It's just gross and blah blah. But they're going to find themselves, like, they're children. Like, maybe 2 generations they can avoid it, but by the 3rd generation, they're gonna find themselves in a mulatto community. And so what they're gonna do, like, they can't just isolate themselves. Like, they're gonna wipe themselves off. Like, they will eventually have to mix. Like, it's gonna be inevitable. And so this is something that people in the United States have to get over with. Like, you're going to mix. Nothing bad's gonna happen. Like, your kid's gonna look a little darker. Yeah, sure, but he's gonna have the European jawline, and maybe he's gonna have a Jewish nose. Whatever. Like, like, get over it. Like, we don't mind, but like, these people, man, like, they posting online how it's so disgusting and shit. But then they like I always say this online with these people, but, like, you can complain all you want, but when you turn 30, you're gonna delete your account, and that mulata that you shit posted against and called her a goblin, she's gonna be your next wife, and you're not gonna care. Like, that's just what I'm gonna say.
I agree 100%. So I'm going to read this here. It says, the awareness of the species itself would gradually develop an astute Mendelianism as soon as it sees itself free from physical pressure, ignorance, and misery. In this way, in a very few generations, Monstrosities will disappear. What today is normal will come to seem abominable. The lower types of the species will be absorbed by the superior type. In this manner, for example, the black could be redeemed, and step by step voluntary extinction. The uglier stocks will give way to the more handsome. Inferior races, upon being educated, would become less prolific, and the better specimens would go on ascending a scale of ethnic improvement, whose maximum type is not precisely the white, but that new race to which the white himself will have to aspire with the object of conquering the synthesis. The Indian, by grafting onto the related race, would take the jump of millions of years that separates Atlantis from our times. And in a few decades of aesthetic eugenics, the black may disappear together with the types that free instinct of beauty may go on signaling as fundamentally recessive and undeserving. For that reason of perpetuation, in this manner, it says here, in this manner, a selection of tastes would take effect much more efficiently than the brutal Darwinist selection, which is valid, if at all, only for the inferior species, but no longer for man. And it says here as well, no contemporary race can present itself alone as the finished model that all the others should imitate. The mestizo, the Indian, and even the black are superior to the white in countless number of property spiritual capacities. Neither in antiquity nor in the present have we a race capable of forging civilization by itself. The most illustrious epochs of humanity have been precisely those in which several different peoples have come into contact and mixed with each other. India, Greece, Alexandria, Rome are but examples that only a geographic and ethnic universality is capable of giving the fruits of civilization. In the contemporary period, while the pride of the present masters of the world asserts through the mouth of their scientists the ethnic and mental superiority of the whites from the north, any teacher can corroborate that the children and youths descended from Scandinavians, Dutch, and English found in North America universities are much lower and almost dull compared with the mestizo children and youths from the south. Perhaps this advantage is explained as the result of a beneficial spiritual Mendelianism caused by a combination of contrary elements. The truth is that vigor is renewed with graftings, and that the soul itself looks for diversity in order to enrich the monotony of its own contents. Only a long-lasting experience will be able to show the results of a mixture no longer accomplished by violence, nor by reason of necessity, but by the selection founded on the dazzling produced by beauty and confirmed by the pathos of love. So yeah, I mean, there is a lot to go into there, but there's a lot of very bold statements.
Everything you just read there, that's the entire, like, if you want one word, one phrase for what you just said there, that's mejorar la raza. That's basically all what he said. Like, you want, like, you pick, and notice that, yeah, he called, like he said that during this mixing the Negro will be redeemed, but he's adopted. He's incorporating to the mix and say, hey, get mixed in, so you become a better Negro than all your other Negroes. Like, that's basically he's saying. Like, he's not pushing him away. Like,
he's essentially making the point that there are deficiencies in every race. He's making this argument. There are deficiencies in every race, and that through the mixture that will take place in the future, the best qualities are going to be absorbed into the fifth new race. But people are very dumb, and they can't comprehend basic things like these sorts of concepts. Even when you try to explain it in a very simple way meant for very dumb people, like some of the members of the audience that are commenting here, unfortunately. And
yeah, that's what they don't understand. Like, this is, and Vasconcelos, he didn't like make this up on his own. Like, he didn't do some armchair philosophy like some Anglos from the early 1900s, no, he studied the history of his country. He studied the history of the empire. He saw the net result of what happened, and so he basically deduced all this he's saying from the attitude of the Spanish Empire. Like Ramiro Maeztu, like when he wrote La Defensa of the Hispanidad, like he talks about the very same thing he says in different words, like everything Vasconcelos said, like Ramiro Maeztu, all these philosophers, like they say the same thing. Like some two philosophers separated by miles of oceans away, like they describe the same thing. Like this is the thesis of the Spanish Empire. Like we're all different. We have some deficiencies. We have some flaws in here. Where we have some unique things that we can do better than others, and we're going to fuse, and we're going to create something better than the two of us combined, basically.
Yeah, very well put. So now we're going to get into real theological hours here.
Can
And
I
I'm not the
pause?
yeah,
Can I
yeah.
pause real quick?
Oh, please, Marcos, please, absolutely.
Yeah,
Chime in.
so I think there's also something to be said about like the whole the way that Hispanics in general view flaws or view like shortfallings. I would say better than flaws, I think even. So like for example, if you're fat and you come from a Hispanic family, you're gonna get a nickname. What's your family gonna call you? Gordo, right?
I mean, I got called Gordis by my family, even though
Yeah.
like, I'm not.
Benito, Gordito, el
Gordito,
Gordito.
If you're short, chaparrito, shorty, if you're white, güerito, if you're black, negrito, like the thing that's great about our culture is that it seeks to give you affection about things that you might feel are your shortfallings,
Yeah.
and this does kind of, I think it's like kind of like a substrate under which mejorar la raza comes from, right? Where it's
And
like,
notice how you framed those names, Marcos, like Gordito, Negrito, like they're not even insultive. Like they're not
They're
said in
they're
a
said with affection.
manner.
They're said with affection.
Yeah, it's it's affection. Ay, mira, este negrito, este prieto. Like they're not.
Yeah.
They're not even saying it in a despective way. Like
No, they're trying to make you comfortable with things that might be your shortfallings, and I think that has to say a lot about the type of culture that we have as far as like quote unquote bettering the race. It comes from that. It comes from like where you view your shortfallings, other people could come up for it, and maybe your kids won't have it, into what that might add up to. I think that's kind of like the personalization of the broader trend. I've always thought of this.
And I can attest to this personally. I grew up as one of the darkest members of my entire family, and I've been called, indio, I've been called negro, but like negrito, all of these things, but it was never meant in a way to put me down or anything like that. I think I've noticed from watching people and kind of reading tweets from like, people from very, I guess, super like hyper Americanized parts of like Hispanic American Twitter and things like that, is like a lot of them get called things by maybe family members, and no one's actually sat them down and explained like these aren't supposed to be offensive things.
No,
so they get told by their liberal professors at university that they need to feel ashamed of this, and this is white supremacy, when in reality this is not what it is at all, and your grandma's not a white supremacist. You know what I mean?
Exactly. It's like when my little brother was young, when he was like a toddler, he was very, I wouldn't say he was fat. He just had a lot of baby fat and he had a lot of rolls. You know what I mean? And so one of my uncles used to call him capullo, which capullo is like a fat caterpillar, So, I viene el capullo, like, and it was cute, it made him comfortable, like who he is in his skin and stuff.
Yeah, so and so it's like what you said, like, for I like to bring this example with my paternal grandmother. Like you can see her, like Mexicans will call her una güera. Like she's very light skinned, but she adopted a very darker skinned mulata, and she calls her mi prieta. ¿Dónde está mi prieta? Amo tanto mi prieta. Like, and it's very affectionate, and we call her our tia Johanna. Like we treat her as family. Like she's the darkest among us, but we treat her like a tia. She's family. Like we respect her the same as we respect our other ones. And yeah, she's very she's very nice, sweet lady. Like we don't say these words to like, oh, you fucking shit, like, and not only that, our banters.
They kind of treat them now as if they're slurs, and they're not.
Yeah, and even when we banter about each other, like our flaws, like we also do that to like grow each other up. Like, oh, antillano necesita un poco, like. We say that, we banter also, but like it's also in an affectionate way. Like it's like to, we give a little jab to each other on our ethnic background, but at the end of the day, we have fun with it, and we don't
it doesn't matter. We don't.
No, yeah, because it's like, dude, it's like how it breaks down on Telegram, for example. Like, you'll be like, oh yeah, Marcos, fucking Mexico sucks, and I'm like, nah, Puerto Rico sucks, and da da da. But God forbid, let a fucking Anglo or somebody from Europe say some shit about Puerto Rico. Like, I'm gonna stand up for you. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Like, it's the
We're brothers. We're giving
same
each
thing.
other shit.
I know something, and then when the Anglos like,
I'm not
yeah,
gonna
man.
know bad shit
And the
about
Mexicans
Come on.
like, exactly. It's exactly that same relationship.
Very well put, guys. I'm loving the commentary here. So we're gonna reach, well, actually, one of the last parts of this, I guess, essay here that was written by Vasconcelos, in which it's going to go primarily into theological territory. So again, this might be familiar for a lot of Momento Hispano fans that are either Catholic or Orthodox. But here's what it is. It says, our purpose is even higher and more difficult to attain than temporary selection. Our values are still potential to such an extent that we are nothing yet. However, the Hebrew race was, for the arrogant Egyptians, nothing more than a miserable caste of slaves. Yet from that race was born Jesus Christ, who announced the love of all men and initiated the greatest movement in history. This love shall be one of the fundamental dogmas of the fifth race that will be produced in America. Christianity frees and engenders life because it contains universal, not national, revelation. For that reason, it had to be rejected by the Jews themselves, who could not decide to commune with Gentiles. But America is the fatherland of gentility, the true Christian promised land. If our race shows itself unworthy of this consecrated land, if it lacks in love, it'll be replaced by peoples more capable of accomplishing the fateful mission of those lands. The mission of serving as the seat for humanity fashioned out of all the nations and all the racial stocks. The bionomy imposed by the world progress on the world by world progress on the America of Hispanic origin is not a rival creed that confronts the adversary saying, I surpass you, or I am self-sufficient. Instead, it is an infinite longing for integration and totality that, for the same reason, invokes the universe. And yeah, it says here, the danger is rather that it may happen to us as it happened to the majority of the Hebrews who, not wanting to become Gentiles, lost the grace that originated in their midst. This may happen if we do not learn how to offer a home and fraternity to all men. Then another people will serve as the access. Another tongue will be the vehicle. But no one can detain any longer the fusion of races, the emergence of the fifth era of the world, the era of universality and cosmic sentiment. And it says here, Christianity preached love as the basis of human relations. And now it begins to be clear that only love is capable of producing a lofty humanity. The official policy of the positivist science, which was directly influenced by that policy, said that the law was not love but antagonism, fight in the triumph of the fittest. However, they established no other criterion to judge fitness itself, but the curious begging of the question contained in that thesis itself. Since the fittest is the one that triumphs, and only the fittest triumph, thus, we can reduce to verbal formulas of this kind all the small wisdom that wanted to disassociate itself from the genial revelations in order to substitute them with generalizations found on the mere sum of details. So what do you think of that in terms of like where he's sort of, I guess, critiquing the Hebrews and sort of being, I guess, disobeying the covenant that God provided for them and for essentially, I guess, not wanting to mix with include the rest of humanity in their, I guess, metaphysical reality and of being, God's chosen people. Because I think that's why a lot of people have actually accused Jose Vasconcelos of being anti-Semitic, because he sort of makes the claim that Catholic universality is superior to the sort of ethnic sort of, I guess, superiority that can be found among many Zionist elements of the Jewish community, if that makes sense. And again, not all Jews are Zionists. I'm not trying to make a vast generalization, but this is something that he's critiquing, though. So what do you guys think?
That's basically perfectly, well, first, like the first paragraph of that passage was basically the gospel. And another thing is very interesting when he said that, revelation was universal and not national. And that says a lot, because a lot of, and this is why a lot of people from the Momento Hispano crowd are saying that, Anglo-Saxons are Jewish. because their attitude towards, you know, this fusion of culture is very Jewish. Like it's like we're not saying it like you're, you know, biologically, you know, literally Jewish, but you know, you have a very spiritually Jewish attitude toward, you know, the Hispanic civilization, and ultimately you will have a Jewish attitude toward, you know, the church. And what Vasconcelos said about, you know, the fusion of cultures and races is very much the position of the Catholic Church. And people have, of course, people can have their own, you know, keep their own, you know, unique tribes and their own nations, but you know, they're also allowed to mix and form new civilizations. And so, and he parallels that with the adoptive nature of Catholicism. You know, the church adopts anybody in. We're all a community of families, and you know what transcends all of our blood ties is, you know, our metaphysical ties, spiritual ties, which is to logos. And so that's ultimately like that's the theological aspect of Raza Cósmica, is, you know, the Catholic adoptive nature of, you know, mestizaje.
Yeah, very well put. I really liked how you phrased all of that. Marcus Cicero, is there anything you want to say regarding this? You just haven't spoken in a while.
Oh no, it's all good. I was actually about to call it a night. Your favorite friend though is in the comments. Are you gonna
Yeah,
let?
we're not doing this for the book review. Maybe I'll do a stream
Okay.
after, but like we're keeping this like we're not doing
Okay.
a flame
All right.
war
Just fill me
during
in
a
if there's
book
anything
review.
funny. I'm still waiting on my thing with him, but whatever.
Right.
But good night, y'all.
Good night.
Marcus. I'll say
So
hello to my friend too. I know
yeah.
you. Hello.
So it says here, this is going to be the last part of the essay, and we're basically done. It says, in order to express all these ideas today, I am trying to expound in a rapid synthesis. I tried some years ago, when they were not yet well defined, to assign them symbols in the new Palace of Public Education in Mexico. Lacking sufficient elements to do exactly what I wished, I had to be satisfied with a Spanish Renaissance building with 2 courtyards, archways, and passages that give somewhat the impression of a bird's wing. On the panels at the 4 corners of the first patio, I had them carve allegories representing Spain, Mexico, Greece, and India, the 4 particular civilizations that have the most to contribute to the formation of Latin America. Immediately below these 4 allegories, 4 stone statues should have been raised representing the 4 great contemporary races, the white, the red, the black, and the yellow, to indicate that America is home to all and needs all of them. Finally, in the center, a monument should have been raised that in some way would symbolize the law of the 3 states, the material, the intellectual, and the aesthetic. All this was to indicate that through the exercise of the triple law, we in America shall arrive before any other part of the world at the creation of a new race fashioned out of the treasures of all the previous ones. The final race, the cosmic race. And that's basically it. So basically, that's the cosmic race in a nutshell right there. That is what he hopes happens. He understands that Hispanic America is at a crossroads here. Hispanic America may not succeed, but he is making the point that Hispanic Americans are very much capable of completing this mission, but it's entirely possible we won't. So what do you guys think before we wrap this up? Right under 2 hours.
Well, yeah, I think this crossroads that you mentioned, it's ultimately a decision of every, whether individually or as a community, of every Hispanic out there in their own niche nation. And so they have to decide whether they want to continue, let the Anglo-Saxon world order, bully them into the submission that they are now, or they want to, take the torch that they were graciously handed on, and take the civilization of the Spaniards to the next level. And whether it be going back to the monarchical phase, or bringing a new communist confederation, like MC says, or whatever stage you want to move forward. Like the point is that the Hispanic today has to move forward in a system that allows them to prosper, to continue the legacy that we've inherited for 300 years. And so that's a decision that's up to now, and I hope, and I have, and I'm very hopeful and faithful that our people will, because we we may be slow right now, to react to all this this propaganda from the American regime, but I have faith that we will wake up. We will have the vigor that we had 300 years ago, and we're going to thrive. And that we may not see it in our lifetime. I don't think we won't, but our children's children will. And yeah, viva la raza.
Agreed. I can only second that. Viva la raza. I agree. We have a lot of conversations to be had. We're the theorists of the future, and we have to figure a bulk of these problems out for our children, because it's not really us that's going to do it. It's going to be basically our grandkids that are going to face these fissures. And so it's good that we're over here starting these conversations.
Very well done. I think this was a very good breakdown of La Raza Cósmica. There's only one other really book review series on YouTube that exists of this book, and unfortunately it was done by a very pathetic group of people. Let's just be honest here.
For sure.
And what I'm referring to specifically now is the Indigenous podcast. And the Indigenous podcast, and I know you guys are probably going to watch this, so this is you can do the sound clip all you want, but this is what I find really funny about them. There's two main hosts to it. One of them is a guy who LARPs as a Peruvian Indian, and basically he took a DNA test. He's like 70% Indian, the rest is Spanish, which I find hilarious. But on top of that, he lives in the United States, just like me and Marcus here, and he's adopted by two white people, which it's pathetic. But he wants to act like culturally he's an Indian when he has absolutely nothing to do with that culture and never will, and will never be accepted by these people. Now, the other host, I forget his name. I don't even know any of these two guys' names. He looks like he could be my little brother, but just, a little bit gordito, if that makes sense. And he's doing the same thing. He is not someone who can really, read and write in Spanish at a fluent level. My Spanish is probably better, and that's really pathetic considering how horrible I am in it.
Yeah, totally.
And he wants to LARP again like he is an oppressed American Indian from Mexico. And I think he lives in Alabama. And it's like, unfortunately, this is the sorts of things that happen to a lot of these people, Hispanic Americans that grew up in the U.S., especially when they're separated from places that are very Hispanic, like Miami, like LA, like New Mexico, the Southwest in general. This is what I'm saying. It's no coincidence that a lot of these Hispanics that grow up in places like the Midwest or the Northeast, they have all of these identity issues, and for good reason. When you're in Los Angeles, there is a much stronger way to retain your ethnic culture if you're Hispanic than, you would be able to in other parts of the United States. And that's just reality. And yeah, you guys are going to get mad. It is what it is, but it's like, all you guys could do when you did your book review was just cry about how racist Jose Vasconcelos was. It's pathetic. It's not something that I think does your Indian ancestors any service, or your Spanish ancestors for that matter. So I'm going to leave.
Another comment I'd like to make is that these people, the Indigenous podcast, and in our own GC, we basically, they basically embarrass themselves. Is that these people will be excited. Get this. These people will get excited of finally getting a U.S. passport. Like, can you believe that? Like, imagine being, I don't understand. Like, I thought you people are the revolutionary, communistic, Marxist.
No, the indigenous podcast people don't promote Marxism, to be fair. They're just
Well, anyway, the
basically,
point
if
is,
they promote anything at all, it's just a really fringe, like, ethno-nationalism with no specifics
Let me
whatsoever.
be my Indio capitalist. Oh my god, that's so sad, bro.
no, but get this. Like, they want to present themselves like they're this revolutionary, resistance of the indigenous. But they will get excited about having a U.S. passport. Like, the very thing that supposedly killed off all their own natives. And they're like, nigga, they're like, you're a fake.
You're a poser. And honestly,
Yes,
we need
sir.
to just you need to just have self-awareness. And I understand that. Like, look, I know I'm a Hispanic American. I know that I go to Mexico or Colombia. They view me as someone that is not really from there, that I'm American. And that's what you guys are too, indigenous podcast people. You need to accept that. You are not a tribal Indian. You guys are mestizos living in America. You two are on different sides of the mestizo spectrum. One of you's lighter, a lot of you looks more Indian, but that's beside the point. We are Americanized mestizos. We can try to, I think I advise people to, spend some time moving to Latin America and living there to try and fill your cultural well. And I think that is something that can be done. I plan to do it very soon myself. I plan to move to Latin America, and I think it's going to be something that is going to be a positive experience for me and for anyone that tries to take on that mission. And I've talked to people that have done this sort of thing before. Most people don't regret spending significant, a few years in Latin America to sort of really understand what it is that they missed out on in the United States. So any final thoughts before we finally end this stream? And then I'll probably start a new one where people who have beef with each other can kind of just go at it. I'll just put it that way.
I would like to say I love everybody of every race. I want to send a big shout out to all my people from Central America, and my Antillanos and everybody else. Have a good night. I enjoyed the stream.
All right. Good night. And thanks for
So
listening.
I would like to shout out,